Hello, everybody. We are back. We know it's been a bit. We just haven't all watched, the same show to talk about it in a while, but we've got something now for you. That's right. We got Vox Machina season 1 and 2. What do we think, everybody? What's the reaction?
My reaction is a bit interesting because I have listened to Critical Role for a long time, but I actually stopped listening to Vox Machina before the events of this season and just skipped straight to campaign 2. So going back and watching these with characters that I kind of knew but had no idea what was going to happen was weird because I felt like I knew them, but at the same time I still had that ability to be completely surprised by what happened. So it was a interesting but pleasant experience for me.
I'm kind of in a similar spot with Jonah in the sense that I watched all of campaign 2 of Critical Role, but I've only watched bits and pieces of campaign 1. A fun thing about me that probably a fair number of viewers won't know is that I actually do tabletop design, some D&D design on the side. And since Critical Role is kind of the dominant figure in the space, particularly when it comes to actual play, even though I didn't watch all of the first campaign, I did basically read through a summary of what happened. So as a result of that, I did kind of know what was going to occur. But I think that made it kind of enjoyable to see how story arcs are adapted in this particular season, how the campaign becomes the TV show, things to that effect.
And just, for me and others who are not aware of this, so both season 1 and season 2 are campaign 1, I'm
Yeah.
assuming, what you're both
Yep,
saying?
yep, yep. All of Legend of Vox Machina will be Critical Role's first campaign, and Amazon recently announced that Critical Role's second campaign, which focused on an adventuring party called the Mighty Nine, Nein, not Nine. That is also going to be getting its own separate TV show.
So I came to the TV show as an absolute novice. Critical Role had been around for years before I ever even heard of them. I had sort of moved out of the gaming space for a while. Despite me finding out later that I actually have a relative who was one of the production managers for like I don't know what. Anyways, something related to Critical Role at one point, and I missed it entirely. And didn't really hear anything about them until the Kickstarter for the animated series. At which point I went, oh, something that's sort of like gaming and D&D related that is going to make it onto a streaming service. That sounds amazing. I'm in. And so I jumped in on the series as soon as it aired and watched, I think, maybe 3 episodes. And I'm going to be really honest, the first few episodes, I was disappointed. I'm like, they are leaning so hard into the most basic of tropes for D&D gaming that I feel like I've seen all of this already. I know exactly where it's going to go. And so I dropped it for a good long while. And eventually it was like, second season's coming out. I'll give it another go. And did find myself warming to it as the episodes passed. But am still now, I'm not entirely caught up. I'm 2/3 of the way through season 2. Still finding them to be making the more obvious choices as far as most of the characters go more frequently than not. And I'm of two minds, right? Because on the one hand, this is going to be the introduction to sort of this kind of storytelling for a lot of folks. It's not bad. And so plenty of folks are going to enjoy that. But having seen it, a dozen times already in my own gaming experience and, watching others game, I was hoping for something a little bit more nuanced and complicated. But I don't want to complain too loud because it's this awesome looking animated fantasy thing on TV that is what I would have given my left eye for as a kid.
Yeah.
My parents wouldn't have let me watch it anyways, but I would have done anyway. But I feel bad. I'm complaining about our embarrassment of riches, but yeah, I wish it was a little more smart. Something, I don't know. Smart's not the right word.
So I gave Jeff the advice, and have given a lot of friends who have watched the show the advice to entirely skip the first 2 episodes of season 1, because of just how kind of like gratuitous, frankly, they are, right? Like a lot of jokes being made to drive home how quote unquote adult the situation is, right? Like, congrats, you can make dick jokes and sex jokes. We get it. It's a mature cartoon that manages to be extremely immature in its maturity, if that makes sense. That definitely cools after the first 2 episodes of the first season. And for me, most of the rest of the first season was pretty solid. I do think the first season's 3D animated assets are pretty atrocious. I didn't like the dragon a whole ton personally. There are some undead creatures that arrived later on that are also 3D animated, which were not entirely my speed. But there are some beautiful action set pieces, some very enjoyable kind of moments of action that I think do kind of drive home the point of like this. It feels like what we are getting here is Saturday morning cartoons for people who grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons,
Yeah.
right? Which can be it, to Cameron's point, can be quite disappointing if you're expecting something nuanced, if you're expecting something with complex characters. Yeah, but if you want to sit down and watch some kind of like beat 'em up, sock 'em out fantasy, that's kind of the fare that we get here.
I just had some technical issues, so I don't know if anyone already said this, but if you are looking for the nuanced version of an animated D&D series, the campaign 2 one is where you're going for. I actually, the reason I stopped listening to Vox Machina, because I listen to Critical Role at work where I can't, unfortunately couldn't watch it, but I stopped listening to Vox Machina because I just couldn't stand some of the characters. They were just too like irreverently tropey fantasy characters that I just couldn't relate to. And so I just skipped to campaign 2. I'm now 70 episodes into that, and I haven't been listening to anything else at work for the last like 6 months or so. And that's again,
Wow.
as everyone
Okay,
else was saying, that's not to mean that I didn't enjoy Vox Machina. I enjoyed it a lot. A lot of it was because Percy is really hot, but also it's just that like there's a place for just fun, very irreverent style fantasy humor, but that's like just eating dessert for 3 meals every day. I'd like something a bit more full of protein. That metaphor got out of hand really quickly. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. I need some meat with my fantasy. Never mind. Just don't look at me.
I'm gonna jump in here. Just say a couple things. One, obviously, I've been nodding throughout because I would agree about season 1 that I have very much appreciated Mason's advice because yeah, the first couple episodes I think are kind of rough. But then it did move into that next arc, which I always forget the name of the Whitestone arc or whatever. That I found to be very enjoyable. It had much more of a point to it. We got to see, some fun camaraderie, and I liked it. I enjoyed it. My wife and I had a great time watching it, especially because it's fun. You know what I mean? And it's sometimes hard to find fun fantasy, and it's there. As for season 2 and the show as a whole, I'm a very two minds about it because on the one hand, to me, we have so little, honestly. I know this it's this idea that we do have a lot in terms of fantasy stories, and the number of people writing fantasy stories right now is epically high, especially because it's so easy to release. But in terms of Western animated fantasy that's adult and raunchy and fun, this is like the only game in town. You know what I mean? And we could say Castlevania to a degree, right? Like there is some of that in the bar scenes, right? And I would definitely say Castlevania is superior. Like not even like this isn't even a competition. It's not even close. Like Castlevania is amazing. If you want to watch some great Western animated fantasy, check that out. But for this, I mean, if there's something else out there, please, I'd love to hear it. So on the one hand, it's like if you want to scratch that itch, this is what we've got, right? And it's not, I wouldn't say it's bad. Like it's fun, it's enjoyable. But yeah, season 2, at least for me, I felt like there were a lot more moments that were just more obvious choices, exactly of like what was going to happen next, delivering on like, you know, the reason why someone would end up succeeding was pretty light, or it happened, you know, the moment before, and then they would succeed because of the thing that we just saw like 3 minutes ago, which I guess does feel like the Saturday morning cartoons, like you're saying. And I could see it being very fulfilling in a gaming setting, right? Because if something is set up at all in a gaming setting, it's like, that was epic, right? But in like a story or a show, we sort of expect there to be more space in between. Here's the setup and then here's the payoff for that. And we just don't really quite have that happening here. I could also see it being really interesting if you had been familiar with the, you know, the critters, the characters before, and seeing how that transition happens, seeing like what they ended up putting on screen. So that's sort of my take. Like I did expect more out of season 2, because as a whole, I enjoyed season 1, and to me, season 2 felt a bit weaker, though. Mason, in our conversation previously, I do think you made a really good point of one of the strengths of season 2, which I'll let you say yourself.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of season 2 as opposed to season 1 is very much, after the first 2 episodes, it's kind of Percy's show, right? Like there are brief moments where other characters kind of get times to shine, but Percy, it is very much kind of like his, the Whitestone arc is his story arc, right? It's where the past catches up. And season 2, meanwhile, is very much kind of everyone kind of has their share. Different episodes spotlight different character dynamics, different characters kind of get opportunities to step up into new roles. And so, which again, I think goes to the whole Saturday morning cartoon kind of aesthetic kind of feeling, right? Which often also kind of did similar things, where you've got, for example, I grew up on the 2003 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle TV show, right? And sometimes it would be Leo that we're focusing on, sometimes it's Raphael, so on and so forth. I think this very much kind of follows that same type of situation. And since the episodes are as short as they are, there's really only so much time for a character to really get kind of a story arc, which I think leads us into these very obvious decisions, where we kind of end up with small episodes that kind of close their own loop, close their own loop, close their own loop a little bit.
You know, it's interesting. We keep coming back to this Saturday morning cartoon comparison, and I wonder if it a lot of it isn't just the decision to keep the episodes to 20-25 minutes, where almost the format that you're stuck in constrains a lot of the choices that you're going to be making. I'm certain there were cost considerations as well, but I would love to see this story told in 45-minute chunks where you don't have to come to a conclusion every 22. And I think, you know, so here I am 20 episodes in, and Grog is still just the dude who wants to bash things and, you know, make fart jokes. Like there's nothing there character wise. It's just, what's the most obvious joke that the big guy can tell right now? That's what we're gonna say.
Sure.
And if it had a little bit more breathing room for character development, I think I would find it a lot more captivating.
If I may, ever so briefly, I know Jonah's got something. All I'm going to say is, for viewers, Cameron only watched the first 3 episodes of season 2. A lot of season 2 is dedicated to Grog and grind. Oh, 7. My apologies.
He does.
I'm a little more than halfway through.
Okay.
He does.
Grog's particular arc, I thought, was the better character arc in season 2. Personally,
I do like it, but again, my thing is that a lot of times the explanation they give for a change of heart or doing something,
sure,
it always seems to come back to the kids, which we got is like, what was that, episode 1 or 2 of the first season? We're like, we're not going to do anything. We're going to go off your own. Oh, but this sad little kid all right, everybody, let's go kill the dragon, right? And that just seems to happen again and again. Like the moment where Grog changes, like I was like, how is this different than all the other people you were just? But I don't want to give too many spoilers. But overall, I do enjoy what Grog goes through. I'm with you on that. I'm with you on like the herd. I love learning about the herd. Like they were super cool to me. There's so many awesome world building things, and I
Yeah.
love that the dragons are the bad guys, and it's like a bunch of dragons, and we're mainly facing off, one of them. It's just again, if you're looking for more complex setups and payoffs, or more, rationality for character decisions, I think or less predictability, I think you're not going to be as satisfied. I think comparing this to dessert or just like good fun and not going in with much expectation was really good. And I continue to talk, even though I know, Jonah, you've got something to say. Please go for it. I want to hear it.
Well, first, I swear this is the last time I'm going to say this, but everything about Vox Machina, the world building, the characters, the complexity, gets better in campaign 2. Like Mercer's world building is incredible, but the world building for Wildmount specifically, which is the different continent that campaign 2 takes place on. I have the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount in my closet. I've read through the whole thing, and it's incredible how much detail is in there.
Really?
Oh
They
yeah,
like went that
like
hardcore in the world building?
oh,
I
there's
mean, like that.
every single thing about it
Yeah.
is like
Hold on.
fleshed out in incredible detail. Mason's gonna grab his too. But what I was gonna say originally was on the subject of episode length and specifically just wanting to change it from 20 to 40 minutes. I don't really think that would change much, because this is the exact same kind of discourse that was happening with fantasy in the turn of the millennium, essentially, because a lot of the fantasy in the 80s and 90s was based off of Tolkien-esque tropes, essentially, and you were getting this absolute like watershed of fantasy that was specifically tied to all these things that everyone else was doing. And the problem was that they did it well, but you couldn't really ask them to do more than that, because that just wasn't the kind of story they were telling. And it feels like the same problem here, where like Vox Machina is well done. The Briarwood arc was absolutely incredible, and I had no idea it was coming. But the problems inherent to Vox Machina are just inherent to campaign 1 of Critical Role. And if you're using that as your source material, there's only so much you can do with it. So like, I love Vox Machina. I will watch the rest of it, but I will also be waiting more eagerly. I said I wasn't going to talk about it again for campaign 2, because that's where I started. That's what I'm still listening to. That is just the better story, to me at least, but that's just a matter of taste. So
a really quick thing to kind of bounce off of what Jonah's saying. This that I have here actually isn't the Wildmount setting book. This is the Tal'Dorei setting book, which is what we get in campaign 1. I do also have the Wildmount one, but I don't have the paper copy. The difference between the setting and the world building in the two is Tal'Dorei originally started out as a home D&D game that Matt Mercer largely improvised kind of as characters were going out into the world. Whereas in the months in between campaign 1 and campaign 2, he spent a whole lot of time kind of like very meticulously working on the continent that would be the setting for the second campaign. I would also say, I don't think it's just Matt Mercer that improved as far as the actual play is concerned. A lot of the players that made these characters in campaign 1 had never played before and genuinely didn't know what they were doing. Grog Strongjaw's character, Scanlan Shorthalt's player, Scanlan Shorthalt's player was like, what's the most typical thing that I could be? And someone was like, a gnome bard. And he was like, all right, I'll be that, right? And Travis, who played Grog, was like, I'm going to be the dumbest guy that I can be because I don't understand this game and it's overwhelming me. And then over hundreds, literally hundreds of hours of gameplay, right? By the end of the first campaign, these players had become quite capable Dungeons and Dragons players, right? Learned the game a lot more. And that, I think, very much kind of comes into the character creation in season 2, which leads us into the whole adaptation conversation, right? But this one is so unique, right? Because It's not a novel that's being adapted. We can't point to an author's progress, but instead it's a whole cast of players and a dungeon master, all of whom improved. The first campaign was, I believe, 121 episodes long, each episode
like
ranging, generally speaking, from 3 to 5 hours of content.
Wow.
So if you total that out, that is like in the neighborhood of 600 hours of experience that these players get kind of figuring things out that goes into campaign 2. And even campaign 2, I would say it's not perfect, right? And they're currently on their third campaign. They're always trying new stuff. But it's a very interesting thing from that perspective of seeing a very weird animal, as far as entertainment is being concerned, being turned into this, right? And to the point of what you're saying, Cameron, it's so funny because we've got the 20-minute episodes over here, which give us very little time. And then you've got the 600 hours over here, right? And just nothing in between.
Well,
It's
except for the fact that we're talking about a game where 1 2-minute combat fight can take 2 hours.
sure, for
Like,
sure.
There's and this is also what I'm talking about, where like this is their source material. We can talk about the context of they were all literally learning how to play the game on screen. But if that's what you're drawing from, either you have to break away from it totally in order to buff up the flaws in the storytelling, or you
it'll
adapt
show
it
up.
faithfully. And either way, a section of the population is going to love it, and a section of the population is not going to like it because they wanted something different.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
And
tricky. It's something I want to support because it's so cool what they did, right? Like just how, the ingenuity behind this.
yeah,
Hey, we're gonna play D&D, watch us on Twitch, right? I assume, right? And and then it generates this huge following, and it's so big they can run this Kickstarter, which is massively successful and makes them even more success because then Amazon wants it. So I think it's all such an amazing story, right? Of just how it came to then be sitting in front of us. So, I think like Cameron said early on, I certainly want to be grateful of that fact. I want to support it. I will say though, for all that, I think that's why I ended up watching the first 2 seasons. I probably would not continue watching it, though you've certainly piqued my curiosity with this very built world of campaign 2. So perhaps I'll check it out. Personally, I don't think that there's a lot of problems with the nature of the characters or even the adventures they get into. It just seems to me, at least, that the writing quality in terms of setups and payoffs or things just being like super straightforward. Like there's a character here that's near the dragon that basically just tells you exposition these days. Like it's so weird to me, some of the things that happen in season 2. So I do hope that whoever is adapting this as they continue onwards also sort of, continues to work on that to deliver the best stories possible, because it is super cool that this exists and I would love to love it more than I already do as a dessert. So that's my intake on it. Does anyone else have any others before we wrap things up?
the only other thing that I would say, my favorite part of season 2 for sure is episode 1. I have never seen dragons be as fearsome as they are in episode 1.
Awesome. Completely
Horrifying. A horrifying thing to watch. Definitely very mature, right? So like there's some moments that maybe you don't want to watch with the kids. But amazing. And there were 1 or 2 fights in season 2 that I go back and watch, but I do think not quite the height that maybe we'd like.
Well, if there's no closing thoughts beyond that, I know Joni had something to say a little bit on this side, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the fact that, and just kind of pay tribute to the fact that Lance Reddick, the voice actor for Thordak in season 2, actually passed very suddenly, like last week. And so just like a quick tribute to him, and also just to mention that since Thordak is the main villain of the Chroma Conclave arc, which is not done yet, they're going to have to make a very difficult decision about how to deal with that and whether they're going to try to replace him or try to maybe use AI generation to kind of mimic or mirror his voice. And so, like, whatever happens with Thordak's voice actor or any characters that Lance Reddick voiced in Destiny 2 or in, I imagine he's not coming back, they don't have any more John Wick's plan, but just with the decisions that those directors and producers have to make, just don't blame them for whatever decision they have to make. It's hard for everyone involved, and no one wanted to be in this position. So just quick tribute to one of the most uniquely voiced voice actors I have heard in any media, and just anyone who's going to continue to watch this, just be aware that this is happening behind the scenes and that it's no one's fault. It's something that everyone now just has to deal with, unfortunately.
I didn't realize that was his voice.
That
Yeah.
was, yeah.
A loss. Yeah, it's a real loss.
He's amazing. I didn't realize that. Thank you, Jonah, for pointing that out. All right. Well, that was us and Vox Machina, everyone. Obviously, we would love to hear your thoughts, or if there is some Western animated fantasy that we're missing out on, let us know, or other shows that you think would be up our alley. Until then, we'll see you next time, Blockheads.